Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Here we are, my 100th episode of the podcast, and that is 100 fascinating hospitality humans that I've met since launching this about 18 months ago. And this project still makes absolutely no sense at all from a financial or a time perspective, but my goodness, am I enjoying having some conversations with some great peers in the industry that I love. And many of you listening send great feedback saying the same, so thank you for our shared adventure. It is an utter privilege that you choose to listen. So for our 100th episode, I really wanted to get a bit of an industry superstar in my eyes, and Robin Hutson has been on my list of people I've wanted to chat to since day one of launch. Him and Danny Meyer. So Danny, if you're listening, I'll be getting in touch with you soon. And in fact, if any of you listening know Danny and can make an introduction, that would be appreciated. Anyway, back to Robin. I've interviewed some of his mates, Mark Hicks, Mitch Tonks, James Golding, Robin Shepherd, and each time I asked them to put in a good word for a chat with Robin. And finally, Danny Pecorelli, one of my new favourite hospitality humans, after the chat that I had with him in episode 98, he joined the dots and made it happen. And I live within a pretty easy cycle of two of Robin's Pig hotels. Pig on the beach in Studland and Pig in the forest in Brockenhurst, and I utterly love what Robin has created. I was lucky enough to meet Gerard Basset a couple of times as well, who he co-founded Hotel de Van with, and he was always an utter gent and encouraged me more to have an interest in their shared journeys. Now, I've seen Robin talk at a couple of hotel events, and basically he just knows his stuff. He oozes common sense, and his attention to detail is exemplary. With more cash behind him than I've had, I've always imagined that the Pig is the kind of venue I would love to run, given the resources. Plenty of open grounds, an awesome kitchen garden supplying the kitchen with exceptional seasonal produce, relaxed ambience and surroundings, good food and wonderfully designed venues, but not pretentious. It really is just a great business, and his occupancy figures and his margins are the envy of many a competitor. And they say never meet your heroes, and I was worried, having finally organised a meeting, I'd be disappointed, but Robin was very generous with his time, he was enthusiastic with his stories, and I felt genuinely privileged to get to poke and prod at one of our hospitality greats sat in one of his venues. So there could not really be a more fitting person for my 100th show, a genuine human of hospitality, and if you told me in episode 1 that in 100 shows' time you'll be chewing the fat with Robin, I'd have been happy in the knowledge that the seedling of an idea had become the sort of show that I wanted it to be. So enjoy the chat, and remember, if you do enjoy this show, you can do me two favours, please. One is subscribe and hit the 5-star review button. It takes just a few seconds, and you could do it right now. Just pick up the device you're listening on. And secondly, if you can support the podcast financially by becoming a Patreon, head over to humansofhospitality.co.uk/donate. I'll spend the money on the very occasional thank you beer when it's hot, but in the main on the kit and the tech and the time to continue to get great guests for all of us to enjoy. Thank you. Robin Hutson, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Hugely appreciated.
Hi Mark, good to be with you.
Thank you. And first one I've done face-to-face in a long time, because we are fortunately, it's August 2020, so we're off the back of lockdown. For people listening, can you just explain, because I've come to your place, Robin, where are we in the world?
Yeah, it's quite refreshing to see a real person rather than the fuzzy screen, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we are currently located at the original The Pig in the New Forest, which is just near Brockenhurst, and it's quite a nice sunny day. out there, and looking like an English summer.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, and your team were very impressive as I arrived this morning. As I got to the door, I hadn't even come in the door, and they said "Good morning, Mark," and then I must have passed 7 or 8 exceptionally happy, smiley, cheerful people. I don't know if they're always like that, or if they're just super grateful to be back open again, or maybe it's because they knew I was meeting you. But an impressive welcome, and the team pleased to be back open.
The team are really pleased. I mean, I think there was a novelty factor for the first couple of weeks. Everyone was enjoying a couple of extra weeks of downtime and putting their feet up. As it dragged on, for sure, it was testing a few people's patience. And so, and they're an energetic young crew, and they're really enjoying being back doing what they do best, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. Just like you say, nice to see people face to face, and just nice to feel the energy of hospitality venues. So I love the Pig. I enjoyed. I think one of my wife's early kind of memories was staying back at a Hotel de Van right in the early days. So I've kind of followed your career. I was saying to you earlier, I've met Mark Hicks and a few other of your buddies, Mitch Tonks, and I've been hassling them to sort of pass a note to you to get you on the podcast. So it's been good fun doing some research and finding out a bit more about you. And I sort of, whenever I read the occupancy rates in your rooms, I want to dislike you. And then the more I read about you, the more I go, man. And then not only that, but you're also into motorbikes and travel. So I wanted to start there a little bit, because that's another one of my passions, is kind of adventure and travel. So when you go off and you do things like that 7,000 kilometre ride across Chile and Argentina, are these things, an escape from the business, or inevitably do you find that trips like that fill you full of inspiration and you come back even more kind of excited and enthused, I suppose, to bring ideas back to the business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky that I have a friend who organises everything for us. So that's a very good starting point.
That's not the only reason he's a friend, right? Didn't you?
So all I really have to do is get my bike to wherever we're starting from. The most recent one was in South America, so we started in the Atacama Desert in Chile and rode south to the southern tip. It's always a bit of a challenge, for a longer trip to sort of prepare your escape, really. We're busy. We have a number of hotels, as you know. Now 1,000 employees. So there's lots going on all the time, and usually a project or two, happening or about to happen. So actually preparing to go and to get out of the office is sometimes challenging. But once there, hopefully I've done the prep work, and of course communications these days mean that I generally take an iPad with me, which slips in the bag quite easily, and there are very few occasions where you're really out of communication for too long, so you can still keep in touch. But I do find it a great escape. Bit of a pun there, really, isn't it? A great escape on the motorbike, but it's a great escape, and yeah, it definitely clears your head. When you're on a bike, you can't really think about anything else too much. You have to concentrate all the time. It's fairly dangerous occupation, and the sort of places we've been to have other hazards as well. So it is definitely a mind clearing exercise. But you do, of course, bump into things that inspire you as well, particularly in South America, which is great food and wine country, of course. So there were several things that I brought back from a hospitality point of view from there.
Any examples? Or?
Well, I mean, I'd always been a fan of South American wines and North American wines as it happens, but the range goes way beyond a bit of jammy old Malbec, and there's some really top drawer wines down there made by the same kind of passionate people you find in the rest of the world, and I don't know why that should be a surprise to me, because making wine anywhere takes a real commitment and passion, but I was blown away by the quality of the wines in all places, really. in the higher regions and lowlands in Chile and in Argentina. So that was great. Of course, cooking over fire was something I've always enjoyed, but really seeing it, we were lucky enough to go to one of Malman's restaurants down there with the seven fires and seeing all this really basic cooking technique, but of course, fantastic theatre and completely delicious as well.
Yeah, nice. How long was the trip in total?
I think I did that last one. I think I did 4 weeks of a 5-week trip. I had to come back just a little bit early. It bumped into Christmas and one thing and another. So so that was my choice to jump out a week early.
Amazing, yeah, good adventures. I think the danger with tasting wine on any trips like that, though, is that it, because you've ridden a bike for 200 miles that day and you're dirty and thirsty and hungry, that it always tastes absolutely incredible, and then you import it back to the UK, and it's never quite the same on a rainy day in February, I don't think.
Well, I think there's always a danger, and classically that used to go for some of the very thin wines from southern France and Greece and so on, but winemaking has come on a long way in the last 20 years, and I think I'm amazed these days. It's a rare occasion you pick up something that is undrinkable, almost at any price.
Yeah, even English wine, particularly the sparkling, doing really well, isn't it?
I'm a really big fan of English wine and have been a kind of ambassador for it, really. We started suppressing champagne, in fact, in 2014, I think it was, when we opened the Pig near Bath, in favour of English sparkling wine. So we currently sell probably around 15,000 bottles of English sparkling wine a year. And our last hotel that we opened, the Pig at Bridge Place in Kent, sits itself in the middle of what they call the wine garden of England. And the really interesting thing, I think, in Kent is that they're not only having success with sparkling wine, but also with still wines and even red wine. I didn't think it was possible, actually, in our climate to find a red wine that I would order other than for novelty value. But I assure you, there are some really great examples over there. So much so that we planted a little vineyard actually at the next Pig, which is the one that's going to be in the South Downs in Madehurst. We've planted 2 acres of vineyard with the intention of making still wine now.
Really? Oh wow, okay. Apparently it's the chalky kind of soil that comes under the channel there, isn't it, in the Downs, that makes it particularly good. Same soil as the Champagne region.
Absolutely that. The one thing, I am a bit of a wine anorak, and the more I go around the world, looking at vineyards and wines, the one common denominator is the fact that the soil always looks, just the kind of stuff that you wouldn't dream anything would grow in, pretty much everywhere in the world, and that seems to make the best wine.
Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? Breaky Bottom. Do you know Breaky Bottom wine? I think I went and saw him in the Downs. I don't know if it's still going.
To be honest, I've never been there, but I mean I've heard of it.
Yeah, I remember going there years ago, and it's in the Downs. It's a beautiful little valley that you drive a couple of miles down a little track, and met the owner, who was quirky, and he had fresh oysters and gave us all this English sparkling. It was the first time that you felt like you'd gone abroad and got lost. It was beautiful. So you regularly talk about hospitality being tiny, so millions of tiny details. What do you mean by that? And do you think that you consciously notice details in a way that perhaps other people only notice subconsciously?
Yeah, I absolutely believe. I suppose the saying that I tend to repeat, particularly to our teams, is that what we do is not very often technically very difficult. We're not scientists splitting an atom. That's what we're not. What we are doing is putting together a whole bunch of tiny details to create some sort of slightly magical experience, and at whatever level. It doesn't matter whether you're going into a McDonald's and buying whatever it is, £2 hamburger. The fact is that the detail that has gone into that burger, everything has been considered that's gone into that burger, like it or not like it. That doesn't really matter. But it has, and the delivery and the fact that you never wait more than 30 seconds and all that sort of. So that operation has been very, very considered, and it's about a load of details. At our end of hospitality, it's a little more complex than that, because we have restaurants, we have rooms, we have bars, we have outdoor spaces, we have kitchen gardens, we have spas, we have all sorts of other things, and every one of those is a collection of details. So for sure it's a million details, without a shadow of a doubt. And the consideration of each and every one of those details, I think, says it actually describes your brand. It says what it's all about. And I'm looking around this room now, and I'm looking at a vintage saucer under an old terracotta flower pot, and I know that my wife has been through a pile of vintage saucers and kicked out the ones she didn't like, so that the ones that exist in this building are of a certain genre and a certain style. And likewise with every other thing, I can tell you the story behind every element in this room, and all the other rooms in the estate, and that's what I mean by a million details.
Yeah, and you really do live and breathe it, because just the details are coming in here. The main smell I've got is I've got a mint plant sort of 40 inches from me, but it's combining with those incredible strawberries that have obviously been picked at just the perfect time this morning in that bowl in front of you, and that aroma alone, I kept looking around and seeing if you had one of those little plug-in machines, but it's literally just the freshness. So you really live it. Do you think you also have a tendency to be either slightly rebellious or to question the norm? And I'm kind of thinking back to when you opened Hotel de Van, and you had that tent card that said no dress code, children welcome, espresso machine, which was potentially a succinct sort of way of slightly rebelling against the tradition of what a classic hotel was at that time. Do you question the norm?
I absolutely question the norm, and and I think at that time, that was 93, 94. Actually, I wish I could find one of those tent cards, because it sounds so crass now, but at the time it was a revolution. You could not, in 94, you couldn't find a decent cup of coffee on any high street in the country. It just didn't exist. So we all live with all the Costas and Starbucks and all the other high street brands now. And that is the norm, and we're all versed in the 100 types of coffee that they produce. But in those days, no, absolutely not. So, and I think 93, 94. You have to think what was going on then. It was we were just coming off the back of a sort of boom in the Michelin-starred restaurants. They, I guess, started to be really noticed in the UK in that preceding decade. And it was Michelin-starred restaurants were sort of translated as a slightly stuffy, formal affair in the main. And I certainly came out of country house hotels where it was a pretty formal experience with, jackets worn at dinner, and, as I said on the tent card, there were no kids allowed, and no dogs, and no this, that. There were a lot of rules around the restaurant experience, and yet I was witnessing in London, at that time. So in the early 90s. They were the start of the Conran restaurants, Quaglino's and Mezzo, and Anthony Worrell Thompson's 190 Queensgate and Alistair Little and so on. So there was this new wave of restaurants opening up that were much, much more in tune and catching the zeitgeist of the time, and realizing that, or at least demonstrating that it didn't have to be a formal, stiff affair to serve great food in a fun atmosphere. And so that's really what we cottoned onto to try to bring to the provinces.
Yeah. And you cut your teeth particularly at the Chewton Glen 8 years, I think, wasn't it, as manager of the Chewton Glen? Funny enough, Andrew Stenbridge has been on the podcast. Did you and Andrew cross over at that point?
No. In fact, we were Andrew and I never worked together. I mean, we know each other well now and see each other. Obviously he's just down the road in the New Forest, and we compare notes from time to time. But no, I left in 94, and a chap called Peter Crome took over, who is now at the Carnegie Club in the Skibo Castle Carnegie Club up there in Scotland, and then Andrew Stenbridge took over from Peter Crome. So we were, I don't know, 8 or 10 years apart, actually.
And now you're practically neighbours.
Yeah.
Was the Chewton Glen particularly influential, though, in you deciding what you wanted to do with Hotel de Van? Did a lot of what you wanted to create in Hotel de Van come as a result of what you'd witnessed at the Chewton Glen?
I mean, without a doubt, my time at Chewton Glen were completely formative years, not only honing some management skills and the other skill set that sits around being a general manager and then managing director of that property, and of course working alongside Martin Scan, who in his time was equally revolutionary. He started Chewton Glen in '66 when and he had zero experience at the time. He sort of bought it and felt his way and to become what Chewton Glen became as a leading, and is still a leading country house hotel over that many years, is a real credit to Martin and his wife Briggy. However, there was a change afoot during my period. So I was there from 86 to 94, and the change was being felt in the metropolis, but it hadn't quite found its way to the sticks. And so I guess I got onto the vanguard of that wave, really, and tried to create something that was simpler, more available, and more in tune with how I believed people were wanting to live their lives. So, and I wanted to see people in a t-shirt and jeans next to a guy in a Armani suit at the time, and I wanted to see that, which actually you see more on the continent. You do see a worker in a French restaurant of old. You'll see a worker, and then there'll be a family out for a celebratory meal, and it's a much more all-encompassing experience, I think, in places like France and Italy and Spain. They've always had a slightly different take on restaurants to our take on restaurants in the UK.
So when you did the first one, was the plan in those early days that you were going to do a number, or was it literally that you just wanted to get your hands on a building and kind of do something different to what you'd seen before?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd been lucky to climb the ranks to the level of managing director, and I was still relatively young. I think I was about 36 or something. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think the maths are pretty good. Yeah, 28 when you started at Chewton Glen.
Something like that, yeah. Anyway, I was about 36 when I'd completed 8 years at Chewton Glen. We'd been through a horrific recession. We'd built quite large extensions onto Chewton Glen during that time. We built the spa at that time. We took it from 40 to 60 rooms. We put in a golf course, so on and so forth. So it was I learnt, I really sort of cut my teeth on all of the project stuff. The recession, which were just after we'd spent all the money on the aforementioned, we had that horrendous recession where the interest rate shot up to 20% overnight or something, and we'd just borrowed £5 million at the time to do those extensions. And I do remember sitting down with Martin, just thinking, "Wow, this feels quite scary." So that was a very formative time for sure. What was the question? What was the question?
Yeah,
I've drifted off. Sorry.
No. It's a good lead in to the answer. So yeah, when you did the first one at Hotel de Van, was the plan to open more, and what were you trying to do that was so different?
That's right. No, that's right. So anyway, by the time I got to 36 and 8 years in, I felt that I'd seen quite a lot, and I really just thought to myself, am I going to work for someone else for the rest of my life, or am I going to try to do my own thing? And I remember Judy, my wife, and I were on holiday, sitting on the beach in Barbados, and we were just we at that moment said, okay, we're going to try and do our own thing. So then, how do you go about that? So first of all, we had to come up with a concept. So the idea was to take this new food experience that was going on in London, and also I was really interested in the sort of townhouse hotel, which really was the precursor to what we now call boutique hotels. So I was really interested in that, and I thought, well, if we put all that together, that's sort of, why wouldn't that work? And if there's a market for crappy hotels in the provinces at about £100 a night, then there must be a market for something slightly more considered. So that was kind of an idea, and then Gerard Basset, who was the sommelier at Chewton Glen, and I went to a wine tasting in London, and we ended up having lunch at one of the very first gastropubs called the Lansdowne in Primrose Hill. And we were sort of blown away, really. I mean, we'd had quite a liquid pre-lunch, but anyway, with this wine tasting. But the guys from Bibendum, where we were wine tasting, they took us round the corner to the Lansdowne for lunch after, and we waltzed in with the samples of wine that we'd tasted at lunchtime, and we sat down. And to this day, I remember the environment. It was kind of what we now know as shabby chic. And we sat down, and I remember my meal. It was a goat's cheese and red pepper salad, which at that time wasn't, that sort of thing just didn't really feature on menus. It was, obviously a very Mediterranean style dish. And I came away from there, and I said to Gerard on the way home from that lunch, I said, what are you going to do next? And he said, I think I'm going to go to California and write about wine. And so I thought, okay, fine. Anyway, a few days later, I thought, well, what about if we encapsulated wine as the USP into this sort of townhouse hotel, simple food? Could there be something in that? So I rang up Gerard, and I'd scribbled on the notes that I'd made, Hotel du Vin, and I said to him, what about, we do a hotel with a wine school and da-di-da, and he'd been at Chewton, I'd recruited him down there, so he'd been at Chewton Glen for a good few years as well. Anyway, he came back to me a few days later and said, I'm up for looking at that. He didn't have any money. He was in negative equity at the time, which was a little bit problematic. Judy and I had a house with a mortgage and all the rest of it, and no savings. So we set about trying to raise some money. And the first hotel that we found a property in Winchester, which was a really good find. Actually, it was a lovely Georgian house, and it had a car park, and it felt like it was in the right part of town. And we put this sort of bistro concept together. We opened with 13 bedrooms. The project in total was about $1.5 million, which was we raised about there must have been 1.3 million, I think, something like that. We raised some Royal Bank of Scotland lent us about $750,000, and it was a time where I remember the first loan document. The interest rates were 12.5%, at that time. So quite punchy stuff. And then we put together a raft of investors. I say it very quickly like that. That took some time and full use of selling skills to get that one across the line. And on a couple of occasions, we got pushed back. And the one thing I learnt out of that, there's a huge difference from people that say yeah, and them actually signing the check. So that was a good lesson learnt. Anyway, finally we raised I think £500,000 from 14 different investors, and the bank debt we had, and off we went. And we opened Hotel de Vaux in Winchester in September '94.
Amazing. Yeah, good. It's nice to hear the story, having sort of.
Oh, and the house, Judy, God bless her, to this day, because Gerard didn't have any equity in his house, so we had to put our house up as the guarantor for the business. So it was quite punchy stuff.
But luckily it went okay. I always have to ask forgiveness of my wife, because we ended up building a balcony on the front of our restaurant down on the seafront, because we upstairs restaurant on the beach. Couldn't even open a window, so you'd have this empty restaurant in July and August, because nobody wanted to sit upstairs and not be able to open a window. So I was like, we've got to open up the doors and build a balcony, and it was about 150,000, and we'd been saving, because we'd been in rented accommodation and done multiple moves, and we'd been saving this cash. And I was like, so I took her out for dinner, sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, and go, here you are, darling, this is basically the deposit for your house, but you can come here anytime you want for dinner. And then we only actually go about once every 2 years, which she reminds me. Is it true that you and Gerard literally used to sleep on the sofa in the bar to save costs at night? Don't know.
Yeah, so we put together a real kind of...
Not together.
We put together a very sort of lean staffing structure. I mean, to be honest, we didn't have a clue what we were doing, putting together this different sort of restaurant. We completely underestimated the volumes, of course, because we opened and we were busy straight away, but we didn't want to commit to a night porter. So Gerard or I would sleep on this big sofa in the lounge to cover nights initially, and we grew it, of course, eventually, the staffing and so on, but. It was very, very lean, and either he or I ran. He did most of the restaurant legwork, I suppose, but he or I were always in the restaurant. And it was a huge amount of fun. We had a lot of support from our raft of investors. Pretty much day one, people started coming through the door. And I think our real first stroke of luck with that was the then Times restaurant critic Jonathan Meades, who really was the grandfather of the current clutch of restaurant critics, and a brilliant man, brilliant writer, and had depth of knowledge to understand what the hell we were doing. And he came about a month after we opened and completely got it and completely loved it and became a friend of the brand. He now lives in France, but so we don't see him as often. But he really absolutely got it and wrote a storming review, and then of course all the other reviews piled in after that, and nobody really disagreed with Jonathan Meades at the time. And that was really the start of it. And then we added some rooms, one thing and another, and it turned into a great little business.
Yeah, it really did. That's a slight understatement, I think, isn't it? Was it 7 venues in 10 years and sold it for 66 million? That's the one. Is that about right? It's not bad, not too shabby, is it? From sofa to there's the summary. What was it though? Because that was amazing. It felt very different at its time. What was so special about it, and was it also partly the timing, I suppose, to get that level of growth in a decade?
Yeah, I mean, timing and luck are large parts of this. Of course, you know the old adage, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And we worked bloody hard for 10 years, and I think we made the right choices in some key properties. We managed to attract some good investment as well from private individuals that didn't give us too much grief. Not any grief, actually. They gave us a lot of support.
I'm sure they were quite happy with the results.
Yeah, and and I think sort of strategically we chose the right parts of the country in the main. Some amazing buildings. We learnt a lot as we went along. And for those 10 years, we were the darling of the press, and it just happened to work. We were quite, although it feels quite aggressive, 7 hotels in 10 years. It wasn't. We were actually quite cautious. We turned down a lot more than we accepted to go forward with. And we had all sorts of crazy offers to get in bed with other people and joint ventures and all sorts of things over the years. But we stuck to our knitting, and I think it's a pretty good strategy when all's said and done. It's very easy, and I think it's where a lot of today's, particularly the sort of celebrity chefs, come unglued, because someone waves a checkbook at them and they forget for an instant that it's not about the money, it's about the people and the product, and I think that's why they so often come unglued, because someone that isn't related to the industry perhaps sees the stardom of a big name and thinks it's monopoly. It's not monopoly.
No, absolutely, yeah. Trophy restaurants. So I could spend 2 hours probably talking to you about the growth of Hotel de Van, because but we can't, because I want to get to some of the more modern stuff. But I just wondered, did you ever any regrets in selling it when you did, or do you still think that was just, I suppose an irrefusable offer? But
no, I mean, we were always going to sell Hotel de Van, and we always had that in our sights. We had said, once we'd got motoring, when we first started, and I think back to your very original question, we absolutely didn't imagine that we were going to, we were just trying to survive with one hotel restaurant. But obviously, once it became, once we realised it was a reasonably robust model, and we could do a few more. That's when we actually said, well, maybe we could do up to 10 of these and then sell it. It happened a little bit earlier than that target, but whether it was 7, 8, 9 or 10, ultimately we would have sold it in that kind of time, with that number. I don't see myself as the sort of person who would know how to run a huge company. I have always run our businesses by being in the trenches with everyone, and that's great, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in order to keep tabs on a much larger organisation, I think that becomes very difficult with that style of management.
Okay. The people that buy it, did they get value from it, or did they move it on again quite quickly? Or?
Yeah, it's changed hands 3 times actually, and I think it's currently owned by some Singaporean serviced office people.
Yeah.
I have I have nothing to do with it anymore. They've opened more hotels, so I think there are about 15 Hotel de Vans now, something like that.
Right.
And the various owners each have, I think MWB, who bought it from us, they also bought Malmaison. And so, I mean, bizarrely, Ken McCulloch started Malmaison in '94, the same year that we started Hotel de Van. We didn't know each other, but actually we were doing something of a similar genre. And the fact that they all ended up together is kind of obvious and bizarre at the same time. But the various owners along the way, I think some have done okay and some haven't done okay. So I don't know. I don't really follow it closely these days. I've got other things on my mind.
You have got other things, and much as I could go through your career in real time, we'll miss the Soho House bit because I want to get to the Pig. So congratulations, you must be one of the few operators in the country that's managed to open a venue since lockdown, because you've not had long, but you've got a brand new one. What's it called? It's down at Harlem Bay, isn't it? Harlem Bay near Padstow. Yep. So was that in build during lockdown, and was the opening delayed because of what we've been through?
Yeah, so the Pig at Harlem Bay, so it's just close to Padstow. It's in that kind of golden triangle of the north coast of Cornwall that starts with Nathan Outlaw, really, in Port Isaac, and runs down to Newquay and Watergate Bay and all parts in between. And, of course, Nathan, Rick Stein, Paul Ainsworth, they're all there, and lots of other great people. So it's in a unique spot. We, Judy and I have had a house down in that neck of the woods for the past 16 years, and I had always said I'd never do a hotel in Cornwall. It's too far from London. You'd have to be crazy, too seasonal, etc., etc. But a few years ago, 5 years ago, I think, we opened the Pig at Coombe, which in Devon, in the Otter Valley in Devon near Honiton. And Coombe has done really well. So it gave us perhaps the confidence to think that maybe further west wasn't the end of the line. And in fact, by opening Cornwall, I think it further helps Coombe, because that's sort of en route to the Pig at Harlem Bay now. It is absolutely a fairly well-trodden route from London and the south. So we said we'd never do a hotel in Cornwall. Judy and I were sitting at our house one day. The next door neighbour came round. I think she'd had a couple of glasses of rosé to pluck up courage to come and talk to us. And she came out round and said our family owned this amazing house just down the road called Harlin House. We were thinking of doing a B&B there. Don't think we can quite manage that. Would you come and have a look at it? I think it would make a great pig. So having said we'd never do a hotel down there, we took one look at it and realised that we had to do it. So it was a pretty. The building hadn't really been lived in for about 50 years properly. There were a few rooms that were habitable, but a lot of it wasn't. It dates back to it's a moody, atmospheric, stone-built farmhouse, really. That dates back to the 1600s, and we started work. So we bought the freehold. We started work on it in January last year. 19? Due to open the doors at the end of April 20. So we were within about 2 weeks of practical completion on site, and about 6 weeks from opening the doors when lockdown happened. So it was a pretty awkward moment because we had contracted staff, but they hadn't started, or a lot of them hadn't started. We were at the fine detail end of the project, which Judy and I spend lots and lots of time immersing ourselves in. Judy, by the way, does all the interior design. We kind of do it together, I guess. But all that finite detail, all the million details that I was talking about before, and then we were just stopped in our tracks. So we had to close the site. We had to deal with the staff, and so some of them had missed out on the furlough, and some of them were caught by it, and so on and so forth. So it was complicated. Anyway, we've got through the last 4 months. We were allowed to pick up again whenever it was. Probably it was sometime, I think in May, wasn't it, that building sites went back to work. So we were able to pick up again there. And we finally opened on the 31st last week. Things are looking pretty good.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. You said just then that you literally took one look at it and knew it needed to be a pig. Is it, what do you see? Do you literally look at the building? Is it how it makes you feel? Do you almost see the kind of lighting and the clinking of glasses and see people in the grounds? What's the trigger that makes you go, yes?
I think it's too romantic an idea to just imagine its gut feel. We knew that area, having had a house down there, very well, and we've seen the development over the years that it really has become a year-round destination. Obviously, Rick Stein and others have done the hard yards on this for us, so we're really adding to the offering down there, and we've had a huge amount of support from the Steins and all the other operators down there. They can absolutely see the benefit for the region of us sort of getting behind it as well. But I think so. We knew the area. I've looked at enough properties over the years to understand the possibilities. We've always worked with listed buildings. So we kind of know what we can get away with and what we can make us of historic England and so on. You kind of instantly know whether there's any glaring problems with it as a site. So many country houses these days, have been compromised by something. There might be a industrial unit next door, or a dual carriageway at the bottom of the garden, or whatever it is, which mean that it really compromises the operations. So, but this didn't have any of those factors. It sits very beautifully. There's sort of distant views of the ocean. It's got quite a lot I like to have as much sort of rural land around you as possible, which it certainly has. We had to take a lease on some additional land from the local farmer, actually, to give us a little bit more land. But all in all, it felt as if it could be something. So then we sort of got into negotiations with Historic England and local planners as to what they would allow. It wasn't big enough. We knew that we would have to add bedrooms, so we knew we could get a dozen bedrooms in the main house, but that's a long way short of our sort of sweet spot of about 30. So we have built in the grounds some pretty substantial beautifully stone built actually, with local craftsmen, stone built barn type structures, which house 15 bedrooms, and then we've got some garden wagons which are kind of shepherd's huts on steroids as well there. So that gets our bedroom count up to 30.
Nice. Is your neighbour pleased to see what you've done with it? Because presumably some of the reward must be taking old buildings that don't really have a purpose and turning them into being fit for the next, generation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of subtext to what we do. Over the years, Hotel de Van and the Pig, I think we have given new life, and in a couple of cases rescued old buildings or repurposed old buildings. So Hotel de Van, we repurposed the Eye Hospital in Birmingham, for instance, and an old sugar refinery in Bristol. And in this case, this building, as is often the case with these type of large houses, they become economically very difficult to rescue as a private house. Generally, most of the land has been sold off, so there's no land to support the house as it would have been in sort of decades or centuries gone past. So it's difficult to see the future for some of these houses. And the great thing about hotels is that it opens up houses for everyone to see, whereas if it goes for a private home or an office or some other institution, then it's not really available for the general public to see. So I think there's definitely a subtext of us rescuing some buildings and doing good things for the future with some buildings, but also there's a bit of public service in so far as that we do allow lots of people to actually see inside these buildings.
Yeah, definitely. I was chatting to Chris Gumbel from Brewhouse and Kitchen. I don't know if you know Chris, but they've Southbourne, so not too far away from where we are now. Took a lovely old building, not quite sort of stately home love, but that role of hospitality in placemaking, I think, and in saving high streets or towns. If you rock up in a village in the middle of nowhere, all of a sudden there's a supply chain, isn't there? There's local suppliers, local farmers have got somewhere to sell, local employment. It's such an important part of our sector, which I think is particularly important at the moment with what's going on with hospitality, I suppose, and the brink of catastrophe that so much of it is on. It's more than just business, isn't it?
I mean, you're absolutely right, Mark. In so many of the areas where we operate, we are absolutely the largest employer, but the ripple effect through the supply chain is at least as many people again that we support. And funnily enough, when we locked down in Harlyn and we didn't open in April, the local taxi driver said, he was banking on us.
Bought a new car.
Yeah, pretty much banking on us opening up, and of course, has had a torrid time. And funny enough, I sent him a text yesterday and just said, "How's it going? Is it coming back?" And he said, "Yeah, thanks to you, it's looking better again." But that it goes for the local shopkeepers, pub owners. The transport network. I mean, it has a huge benefit to whole areas, and also gives somewhere like Cornwall, where a lot of the employment is seasonal, it gives we absolutely intend to stay open 12 months of the year, and to give we're putting 80 or 90 new full-time jobs, annual jobs, not seasonal contracts, into that area. That's quite a significant economic boost, to be honest.
Yeah, that's good. So concept-wise then, for the Pig, looking at what you'd done with Hotel de Van, was it kind of going, look, we did that with Hotel de Van, I've got this itch that I want to scratch, I want to do it again, or was there something you didn't do with Hotel de Van when you thought, I wonder if I can take certain ideas and certain concepts and try them in a new way? How much inspiration, I suppose, came from that, and what were you trying to do differently with the Pig?
I mean, to be honest, when we sold Hotel de Van, I didn't really have any aspirations of starting all over again. Clearly, we'd made a little bit of money from the sale, and so the pressure was off somewhat. Not all 66 million ended up in my pocket, I hasten to add. there are a few banks involved.
Yeah, I presume that was the case, Robin. I didn't like to ask, but that was my presumption.
But I don't know. I thought I'm going to take a breather for a few years, and whilst we won't go too deeply into Soho House as you suggested, but I had been a non-exec director for Soho House for a number of years already, and Nick Jones said, "Look, rather than take on a load of other stuff, why don't you become chairman and give us a bit more time?" So that's what happened immediately. So that kind of kept me busy, and we were expanding in America, and we were having a good time looking at properties for Soho House, and deciding on that expansion. And Nick remains, one of my best mates in the industry today. But after 3 years, we were raising money for Soho House, and I kind of sold myself out of a job when we sold the majority stake to Richard Caring. So I was doing a bit of project work for Nick, and then I received the call from Jim Ratcliffe, who owned a property then called Park Hill, now called Limewood, just up the road in the New Forest. They were nearing completion of the project to turn this house into a hotel, and he called me and said, the project's out of control, we need some help, I'm not entirely sure we know how to open this property, would you come and get involved? And the timing just happened to be spot on. So I got involved with Limewood. We got that open in, I think it was 2009. Sound about right? Yeah. 2008, maybe 2009. And then I was looking at the rest of the properties that were within the Limewood portfolio and just tidying it up, really. There was a loss-making restaurant, a half-finished restaurant in Southampton. There was a wholesale meat business. Anyway, I was closing and selling and just tidying up the portfolio. And there was this little hotel where we're sitting now, and it was called Whitley Ridge, and it had about 15 bedrooms, and it had had a Michelin star at one point. But the bedrooms were very tired. The whole property was really, really tired. And so I had it valued to sell it, really, just to tidy it up. And it was at the time it was valued, obviously based on its EBITDA. It was valued as a multiple, and it was valued at £1 million. And so I was looking around, sort of kicking the tires here one day, and I walked into the kitchen garden, which just had weeds in and a couple of carrots, and there was a sort of light bulb moment where I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a hotel that see if we could replicate what happened at Hotel de Van in terms of driving food and beverage into a hotel, where we brought the kitchen garden completely to the fore, and that became the clue and informed everything we did. So it informs the decor and the style of the operation. So anyway, cut a long story short, I said to Jim, look, I've got this idea. We made a little presentation to him. I said, look, we're the management team, myself and the management team will buy 50%, leave you with 50%, and let's see if we can have a go at it. So that's what happened, and we got planning permission to convert the stables into another 10 bedrooms. We redid the house, we put on the conservatory, and finished off other extensions that hadn't been complete, new kitchen and all the rest of it. And we opened in, seems like a lifetime ago, but it was only 2011 actually, summer of 2011. So we're about 9 years old in this building. And I was always worried about the countryside on the wet Tuesday in February, and it just took off, really just gangbusters, and we haven't, touch wood, looked back, apart from a few little interruptions of the last few months.
Yeah, the odd pandemic. I like it all the more for the fact that it was an accident, actually, I think, and that you hadn't spent sort of, 2 years kind of, planning and strategizing. I just like, there was a kitchen garden and a rundown building, and you created this. It's kind of nice that it evolved rather than was designed, I think.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's not contrived in that kind of way. I've always been firmly of the belief, same with Hotel de Van, I think we were justified in putting the name of Hotel de Van outside the door because Gerard was the best sommelier in the world. We absolutely, did a deep dive into the world of wine. We ran wine courses, we had good cellars, we employed great sommeliers. It became a fantastic training ground for sommeliers. So, we were very, very genuine to the name, and I wanted the same to be true of the pig. You're probably going to ask me why it's called the pig.
Did I read something about something in the US? I'm trying to remember what the trigger was. But yeah, why? Go on. Why is it?
No, I'd always liked the name of the restaurant, the Spotted Pig in Manhattan, and I sort of, there's something weird about that juxtaposition of the skyscrapers of Manhattan and a restaurant called the Spotted Pig. But so that was partly it. But really, the idea was to break down the formality of country house hotels in the same way that we'd done the town centre hotels with Hotel de Van, but to break it down. And one of the reasons that through the 80s and 90s and the country house sector, there was a point where every Gothic pile in the middle of a field was turned into a country house. That was sort of the 80s. They were all privately owned, and then they were bought up by outfits like Von Essen. Von Essen went bust in the when was that, about, I don't know, 2012, something like that. And so all these previously privately owned hotels then had become available again on the market, and so it was all a bit of a state of flux that was going on in the country house hotel market. But the ones that survived were still quite expensive, quite formal, of a certain genre. They were all very 5-star, and so what we were again trying to do, and I suppose if anything defines my career, it's that kind of upper mid spot. And so I guess we were trying to, that's the bit I know best, and trying to bring that to the country house as opposed to the townhouse. And so we were trying to give it a name that wasn't the something house hotel or something lawn or castle or whatever. People are rather scared of that. They're rather intimidated and scared to go up the drive. I wanted to give it a name that people wouldn't be scared to go up the drive. I wanted it to have agricultural connotations because of the kitchen garden. And if it sounds like a pub, that's good because people aren't scared of pubs. So.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And it makes you smile, I think, when you hear the word the pig for some reason, doesn't it? So you mentioned then a couple of times the garden, so the weed-filled garden had kind of inspired the rest of it, and you've become increasingly known. I guess the 25-mile or 15-mile originally, I think, wasn't it? And then the 25.
Yeah, we couldn't make the 15-mile work.
No, it was just a little bit too. When I read that, I was like, man, why do you always have to go one step too far, Robin? Jesus,
over ambitious.
Yeah. But yeah, so increasingly known, I guess, for provenance and seasonality. Were you already into, because not everybody sees a garden and goes, okay, I'm going to build the whole concept around that. Were you already into kind of growing veggies and your own kind of garden?
No, not at all. I suppose I just thought it was, again, people becoming much more interested in provenance you could feel the wave of more interested in plant-based foods and all of that stuff. I mean, none of it was new. I mean, people like Raymond Blanc were doing kitchen gardens long before I even thought about it. So it wasn't new, but no one had really brought it right to the front of what they do. So I mean, now when people talk about the pig, you're more likely to say, oh yeah, that's the place with the kitchen gardens than probably anything else, and that's absolutely intentional. We take it very, very seriously. It's not a toy. We employ something like over 20 kitchen gardeners. My son Ollie is the sort of architect of all of that. We have our own nursery with polytunnels where we grow all the seedlings, which is sort of spreadsheet heaven actually, because we now have 7 kitchen gardens. All of them have 100 beds, and we've got 3 seasons a year. So you've got to have the right number of seedlings to go into the right bed at the right time, and so there's a bit of science behind that. But yeah, we take it very, very seriously, and we love the whole provenance and the local thing. We find amazing suppliers of all sorts of foodstuffs, around every hotel, and it's a joy to get involved with them. I mean, it's fun.
Yeah, well, this podcast is called The Humans of Hospitality for that reason, because it's the human connection. I think we've said for years in my business, we don't buy from companies, we buy from people.
Yeah.
And you've got to like the people, and people who take whatever their little niche is, their obsession to the ultimate level. And there's some crazy people in hospitality, whether it be Lobster, mozzarella, or whether it be a particular gin or whatever it is, but they just take things to these extremes. Your gardens are phenomenal. James Golding, your exec chef's been on the podcast, and I think he was part of the inspiration. So the reason I was smiling so much when you were talking about that spreadsheet is my wife thinks I'm particularly sad at the moment, because in lockdown, my release, we bought a house a few years ago, and it's a lovely walled garden. And so I built a little greenhouse, and I've been getting into the gardening, and she thinks it's tragically sad that I've got a spreadsheet literally with seasonality, and it's really hard to keep on top of. I'm envious of you having 20 odd people who know what they're doing, because I've got things planted at the wrong time in the wrong place. But it's been probably my favourite bit of lockdown, is because I've always loved it conceptually. When James showed me around your garden, I was like, oh my goodness, and I think I was there. Must have been maybe spring last year, but it was perfect timing, everything was in bloom. So I've always loved the idea, but now to actually get my hands dirty and do it, I think there's something about that connection with the land and connection with seasonality, and it's probably one of the reasons why I love your brand. And actually, when you reflect it on the menu, I think I had some sort of I follow a predominantly plant-based diet. That's a whole other story, and it's relatively recent. But he served me this beautiful kind of it was just a selection of things that had been picked that morning from the garden, basically, but cooked exquisitely. It was just nice to see plant-based food done well, I suppose. So
I think the challenge when you do it domestically is that you always end up with too much of one thing at one time. But of course,
my wife sees another courgette.
But of course, in a restaurant, you have the opportunity to, and we change the menu every day. So whatever's fresh and coming out of the garden, we put onto the menu. So you can have 50 ways of doing a courgette if necessary.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I've tried to inspire my chefs more, but I think that change, and you alluded to this earlier with sort of plant-based, but you really have to be good, and there's so many more flavours. With meat, you've got 4 or 5 key animals that we eat, I suppose, and certain ways of cooking them. But there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of edible plants that can all be cooked in a myriad of ways. And I think you can tell so much now around the quality of a chef by what they can do almost with their plant-based offerings more than their meat-based. Much as lots of chefs would be anti that, because classic kind of French cuisine, I guess, was
I think it's changing now. It
is changing. In fact, we'll touch on that. So how much of that change do you think is this sort of environmental issue? I suppose I feel that we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, in the same way that I suppose I expect an airline pilot to know how to fly a plane, and I don't need to know too much about that. People like you and I should understand where food comes from and the impact on the land, and I sort of feel it's our responsibility. But the difficulty is, people always want to buy a cheeseburger or a steak, I suppose. So there's this sort of contradiction between, how much of it is educating people and saying, look, you know what, maybe exploring veggies a bit more, flexitarianism or something, and how much of it is just going, look, this is what the consumer wants to buy, or is it just about, you know, really understanding our suppliers and getting a closer relationship, I suppose, with the farmers, that you can look in the eye and you trust the way they farm rather than just seeing food as a commodity?
I think, I mean, it's a big subject,
It was a big question.
I mean, first and foremost, I mean, I, like you, eat much less meat these days than I once did. And probably, you know, from childhood you were brought up with a kind of on a meat and two veg diet, I suppose. What I think is the most important thing is that whatever you eat is farmed or grown, you know, in the best possible conditions. So, you know, the other day I was talking to the oyster and mussel farmer in the Camel Valley near the Pig at Hyde Bay, and you know, just a fascinating story of growing these things, but you know, grown with the highest credentials, you know, for sustainability and ethics. And the same with there's a great little organisation down there, the National Lobster Hatchery. So one of our inventions at the Pig at Hyde Bay is we've got a second outdoor restaurant called the Lobster Shed, and alongside that we have become sort of sponsors of the National Lobster Hatchery. So the Lobster Hatchery works whereby the lobster fishermen who still land into Padstow, so they're landed 2 miles from us, when they land a female lobster that is full of eggs, instead of selling it on, they take it to the lobster hatchery, where the hatchery relieves the lobster of its eggs and looks after the eggs, developing them into little lobsters. When the lobsters are old enough to burrow in sand, that's when they can protect themselves. So then they're released, and then they go through the cycle and are caught again, and so it's a perfect sustainable cycle. And actually, you know, lobster is one of the most sustainable seafoods, actually. So there's all those lovely little stories. So as far as so I don't see anything wrong with meat or fish protein as part of the diet, and you know, absolutely I would completely miss it if I didn't have that. But equally, plants offer such a wide variety of things, and I think we see it now that on our menus we have a largish section, apart from starters and sort of main courses, that is called Mostly Picked This Morning, and we hero a veg in each of those dishes, so be it, I don't know, carrots or celeriac or whatever it is, and we try to do something reasonably interesting with it. Or sometimes if the veg is good enough and pure enough, you don't need to do a lot with it. But that section has gained huge popularity, and probably now outsells starters. I mean, we do serve those as starters or main courses, but really huge uptake on that section of the menu. So I think it clearly demonstrates that there's a shift in that direction. I mean, it's not so many years ago, you know, from your restaurants, not so many years ago that you know, vegetarian would walk into the restaurant and everyone would be groaning and bung him a you know, kind of wild mushroom risotto, because that's all we can think of, and hope for the best, you know. But actually, you know, that's changed a lot in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it does feel like this time it is a genuine change. You're absolutely right. 3 or 4 years ago, I used to complain about,
Yeah.
particularly the fact that veggies would write to me and complain, even if I had 3 or 4 veggie mains on the menu, there was never enough. And then they'd complain if there wasn't a V for veggie.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I don't put an M for meat and an F for fish. We sort of expect you to read the description, but I think this time it's changed, and I guess I've become more interested. And actually, rather than giving up something, I think what I've done is I've added so much to my diet rather than losing something. So I would never have tried your sort of freshly picked this morning menu before. It just wouldn't have interested me. I would have gone for the lamb or the fish or something like that. But actually, this sort of, and I guess it was motivated for all sorts of reasons that I won't bore you with. But actually, the thing that's been exciting is that I try different things on the menu and try new stuff, and it's added more than it's taken away.
And I think the other aspect that's adding fuel to the plant-based side of things, of course, is there's definitely sort of post, and we're not quite post-pandemic, but at least post-lockdown. Firstly, like you, people got into things like growing vegetables during lockdown, but actually, there's absolutely more consciousness about the environment now in a post lockdown period, and I think people are just ethically more conscious somehow, and it's a weird side benefit of what's happened, but it's absolutely true. People cottoned on to the data that with less planes flying around, it was better for the planet, and so on, and that seems to have percolated through other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I think so, and I think maybe just that slight simplicity of just slowing down for a little while and going, you know what, we were locked down, we were only allowed out for an hour a day, and we found spaces and green spaces near where we lived that we didn't even know were there, or we'd not visited for a long time, and actually the simple pleasure of having a walk through a garden or through a park or by the ocean, if you're lucky enough to live in the south, was just a reminder that maybe we don't always need to hop on a plane or be jettisoning off to the next thing. So perhaps a slight love of simplicity. And I'm conscious of time, but I want to chat briefly about the pandemic. So you were sort of motivated or inspired to write a pretty open letter to the government during the pandemic, and it was very much about the sort of the plight, I suppose, of rural hotels, and you had it signed by a number of your peers. What motivated you to do that, and did you get a response?
Yeah. I think when it hit us all hard and fast, and nobody saw it coming, 2 weeks before lockdown, I was just thinking, it's something that's happening on the other side of the world, and okay, Italy have got it, but that's because they're all living on top of each other or something, and all that. You was listening to too much news on television probably, and then bang, we were locked down, and the shock of that, and I felt a deep responsibility for our team. As I said, we employ about 1,000 people now, and of course their families as well. It probably means you're responsible for 3,000 or 4,000 people. And I was really scared that out of ignorance of the sector, that the government, perhaps with the best will in the world, would make the wrong decisions. So it just started. I just said to Judy one day, I'm going to write to the Prime Minister and make my feelings known. And literally I was drafting the letter, and I thought, maybe I'll get a few other signatures to go on it. So I sat down one evening and just, in no particular order, I just really got out of my email addresses about 40 or 50 hoteliers, pub owners, restaurateurs, but all based outside of London, because I felt that there was quite a lot of noise already happening inside of London. And so I was scared that with the government making their decisions on how to best support the sector, we would get scooped up with the London scene, and I believed we had a very different set of circumstances and problems, not least seasonality, and a very, very fragmented part of the hospitality sector. So anyway, I wrote this letter, and it was just explaining kind of all the things that we now we now all talk about and making some suggestions. But within 24 hours, I had a pretty impressive list of names to add to the bottom of the letter, and I asked them all to give me the number of people they employed. So I think by the time, in 24 hours, I all of a sudden I was writing a letter that represented about 40,000 employees, and which was it even surprised me, really. Anyway, I know a little bit Ben Elliott, who is the co-chair of the Conservative Party, but his day job, he runs quintessentially the concierge service. And he said, yes, if I wrote the letter, he would see that it got to the PM. So that's what I did, and then I sent it to MPs and I put it on Twitter, and just generally made a bit of noise about it, and but actually sent a hard copy to 10 Downing Street. I mean, I didn't know whether, to be honest, whether it would just go straight in the bin or what, But after a couple of weeks, I got a call from Boris's senior business advisor, a guy called Oliver Christian, that I ended up having a series of phone calls with. And he was very close to the PM, and he would say to me, "I've only got 20 minutes because I'm due next door with the PM," and I would say, "Oh, well, don't forget to mention this point," and so on and so forth. So that relationship developed quite well on the phone, and then I was invited to join a Zoom call with Boris himself and half a dozen other operators from the rural economy. And I thought we were all asked to land a couple of points, and I felt that he was really listening and grasped the importance of it. And then shortly after that, I received a letter back from Boris, and it clearly wasn't just a cookie cutter letter. It was answering some of the points. And I think what we've ended, and there were a lot of people lobbying, so I'm absolutely making no claims about this at all. But what we've ended up with is pretty close to many of the points that were being asked for. So. Like I say, there were lots of people doing lots of good work, not least Kate Nichols from UK Hospitality, and people like Jonathan Downey, and there were lots of people working very hard at it. But I was just adding to that, really, and hopefully there was a little bit of a voice for rural businesses.
Yeah, and I think the list of things we were asking for, and Jonathan and Kate have both been on the podcast as well, and I think most people were sort of, it's like you say, it's not rocket science, is it? We were asking for the same thing. Well, clearly we employ a lot of people, and the Cut VAT campaign for hospitality has been going on for decades, I think, hasn't it? And trying to put ourselves much more in parity with Europe, where it's pretty much most of Europe charges a lower rate, at least on the accommodation element. What do you feel? I guess there's plenty to talk about on some of the positive stuff like furlough and now the VAT cut. But do you think there's more that needs to be done? And what's your prediction, I suppose, for it feels like we're on this sort of potential tidal wave, catastrophic kind of tidal wave for hospitality, and it's unknown yet. And I think a number of people have now reopened, and out of the city centres, ironically, it's almost like London city centre is still really struggling, but out of the city is good. But then that's very seasonal. What's your prediction, and what more do you think the government need to do?
Well, certainly, just at the moment, it's slightly playing into the hands of businesses outside London and the cities. We've certainly seen a good level of business since reopening. I think there's two big elephant traps just coming down the road. The end of furlough, and they seem to be saying that this really is the end of furlough. We're not going to extend that at the end of October. Will really will really cause, I think, a wave of closures and redundancies. I can only assume that's what will happen. I mean, I'm pretty determined that we're going to not make. We haven't made a single redundancy yet, and I really want to avoid that at all costs if we can. And so for us, we'll be working hard for that not to happen. But for smaller businesses and perhaps businesses without some of the momentum that we have behind our business, I think they won't have any choice really. So that's the first elephant trap. Second elephant trap is they've used some very curious dates for the ending of the VAT relief, 12th of January, I think it is, where for seasonal businesses that absolutely needs to last until Easter. So and the business rates break and all of that, all of those benefits need to carry through until Easter of 21. Otherwise, all the efforts to help seasonal businesses might as well, be thrown out the window. So I think that's a really tough one. They just need to get their head around that, so that for seasonal businesses, they can survive those last few months. But it would be crazy. They've put so much support. The government have put so much support, behind this for nearly a year, and to fall at the last hurdle would just be crazy. So hopefully that will come in time. The one silver lining in all this, I think, is that in decades, I've been in the business 45 years, and I don't think I'd ever heard a government minister utter the word hospitality. And now, of course, it's a bit, I wouldn't say flavour of the month, but it's certainly high on the agenda, that every minister that stands up is talking about hospitality. So I do think out of all this, there is a recognition of the huge economic and social part it plays in the UK in society and economically. So hopefully that won't get lost in the in the melee of coming out of this. But and I hope that continues, and maybe one day there'll be a cabinet post for tourism, Minister of Tourism. And that would be a very fine thing to come out of this.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think we seem to have been a sector that's just sort of considered, I don't know, as an interim job when you're at university, and almost anti-hospitality. It's low pay, it's bad hours. Why is it important? And it does feel like, partly I think because of the economic impact of how many people we employ and how much taxes we pay. But I think more than anything, people have missed kind of going out and meeting their friends and going for a beer, and all of a sudden, in a similar way that the people have been out and clapping the NHS and being supportive and not sort of comparing us with life and death. But I do think there's been this appreciation that, I really miss just going and sitting in a pub garden and having a beer or a glass of wine and having a meal and chatting with mates. So, I hope that lasts, and that as an industry we can stand up prouder. And I think actually we've done ourselves a lot of favours, because I think a lot of people it's been obvious as to why we've been on our knees. We're closed. No business can have a zero revenue strategy for any period of time. Accountants, marketing, solicitors, they've all at least had some income, even if there's been a knock. So it's been obvious that we've had this huge impact, I suppose, and why we need help. So, but I guess the other thing that we've done is, despite the fact that we've been on our knees, we've stepped up and we've fed the vulnerable, we've fed the NHS.
Yeah, I think
you changed the diet of gorillas, I think, didn't you? During lockdown? You better explain that. Or
obviously the one bunch of people we didn't furlough were the kitchen gardeners, because we didn't want the gardens just to be lost for the sake of however many months it was going to be. So we gave the produce to neighbours, to the vulnerable in the area, to food banks, to all sorts. But down in the Pig at Bridge Place in Kent, they had a lot of sort of brassicas and so on that were starting to bolt, and I think they'd they'd fed the village and they'd fed the vulnerable and everyone else that they could think of sending food boxes to. And they are very close to the wildlife park Howlett's Zoo that house a number of gorillas, and ended up taking Land Rovers full of these brassicas down for the gorillas. So even the gorillas, who are an endangered species, benefited from that. So, which is a good
I thought it was great when I heard that, and I just hope they appreciated the level of cuisine that they were getting. I hope they got table service, Robin.
We did. They weren't lightly sauteed or anything like that. They were just raw.
Yeah. Have they left any reviews on TripAdvisor or given you any feedback? I'm almost at an end, but the one thing we didn't touch on then, which is maybe less relevant for country hotels, but clearly for hospitality, is this rent moratorium as well. End of October, I think that's the other big cliff that we're approaching. Have you heard or seen any novel ideas that can solve that problem? Because I can't work out with the government whether they're leaving it as late as possible because they just want the private sector to get on and organise it, or if they've literally got no idea what to do about it. But we've got this moratorium, haven't we, that there's all of these restaurant owners, hoteliers as well, who are protected until the end of September. But at that point, not so much about then rent going forward, because maybe we've managed to take a few quid, but it's this rent arrears issue, I suppose, of zero revenue whilst we've been shut. Any nuggets of wisdom on that?
Well, no, I mean, to be honest, we're not directly affected because we own our properties. So our rent, if you like, is in the form of interest to the bank and repayments to the bank, and we've had some relief on that. I mean, I think it's a pretty desperate situation in the restaurant sector in particular. Very few restaurateurs actually own their properties. The original Jonathan Downey scheme of actually just having a rent-free period, that period of time got added onto the end of your lease, so you just extend the lease, and then some sort of matching funding from the government for the landlords, who obviously all have loans and so on, sounded like potentially a workable idea. I see that in certain larger landlords are starting to step forward. Crown Estate, I believe, have helped and are switching to turnover-based rents, which of course would be the key rather than some fixed cost. But let's hope out of all this. I mean, I think the sector was already in trouble with this, with landlords hiking rents. You mentioned Mark Hicks before. Just before lockdown, he closed his Brewer Street restaurant, because the landlord had pretty much doubled his rent, and it was just no longer viable. And there's a very experienced restaurateur, he's not a fly-by-night operator, that just couldn't make it work. So I think something had to happen anyway, and perhaps out of all this, the very best outcome is a different form of rent calculation based on turnover. If that happened, then that would be a great thing. How this immediate issue pans out, I mean, is really anybody's guess. I just hope the government step up and offer support, recognise what's going on and offer support in that direction. I'm sure they are waiting for the private sector to see what they do, and perhaps with some of the larger landlords, stepping up now, maybe we'll see others follow. Hope so.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got to mention it because it'd be remiss of me not to on a personal level, but if when you're chatting to Boris next time about the VAT, can you go for sort of Q2? Because by would I mean not Q2, but if we could trade spring next year, because the thing is, with a 15% saving for us in January, February, March, it's nothing, because there's very little trade in Jan, Feb, March. We're running at a loss anyway. Our turnover's low. You're not saving much. If we could get the first quarter at the very least in next year of spring, get that cash back into the coffers, that's for us, I think, when we're looking at some sort of recovery, is solid trade April, May, June, and then we can get out of this.
Well, funnily enough, in my original letter to Boris, I was asking for those tax breaks to be to the end of Q2, So the business rates break and VAT. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, just because you're allowed to open doesn't mean instant, profitable revenue, does it?
Yeah, no. Jan and Feb are always a disaster. Right, I want to end on a bit of positivity to the future. How many pigs have you got now, and how many do you think you will do ultimately?
We have 7 at the moment. One of which is a sort of B&B pig in Southampton. It's not a full pig, and we're working on an 8th in West Sussex at the moment, in the village of Madehurst in the South Downs. So that will open in about a year's time. That takes us to 8 properties. I think, given what we've just had in this past year, I'm not going to rush into doing any more immediately after that. We need to regroup and try to get back on a really good stable footing. We've got a lot of extra debt to repay. I think we should probably sit tight and then see what happens. Really, I have no aspirations to take over the world of boutique hotels at all. As I said before, I don't think I know how to run huge businesses. My instinct at the moment is stick on 8 until such time, as I get bored or I bump into that property I really can't refuse, or whatever. I don't know.
A neighbour knocks on your door and says, "Just one more, Robin." Just one more.
I'm not. I'm only a sort of. I'm early 60s now, and I'm not the 40-year-old with quite the same energy. So I've still got a few years in me, I hope. But nevertheless, it's kind of it's maybe the latter quarter of my career rather than the middle quarter.
Yeah, well, I wonder what motivates you, because clearly you could presumably stop financially, so there must be another reason that you do it. You've also, you're not a slacker. You've got the ski property, I think, in Europe as well, haven't you? You've recently become, is it chairman or no, non-exec of Belstaff, the clothing brand. What's the point where, I don't know, you just go, I suppose, let's sell it and relax? Or have you got, I suppose it's, what does Robin's day like? Are you fundamentally doing the stuff now that you enjoy and therefore carry on doing it? Or do you go, this is really a bit of a pain in the arse and I could do with the rest?
The thing about this industry is you never know what any day brings, do you? So sometimes it's a pain in the arse and sometimes I really love it. Most of the time I really love it. Because Judy and I do the projects together, it means that although we work a huge number of hours still, we spend a lot of time together, which is, I don't think it would be sustainable if I was going away to an office for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I don't think that would, kind of work. But we do spend a lot of time together. We both enjoy it most of the time. It has its moments, of course, but I think it's about as long as we are still enjoying it, then we'll keep doing it. And the moment it becomes more grief than anything else, then we'll probably stop, and one day we'll sell it.
I'm presuming you don't get a phone call on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock that says head chef's just had a hell of a shift. He's walked out the door. He's not coming in for breakfast service tomorrow morning, and we've got 150 people booked for lunch. Do you not get those calls anymore?
I get less of them these days. Yeah,
they go to James.
We've got a in the 8 years that, or not 9 years that we've had the pig, we've got a really well-established management crew. Quite a few of whom have been with me right from Hotel de Van days and all the way through. So there are now individuals, not least. I have a wonderful group ops director, Tom Ross, who really takes a lot of that operational grief away and does a very good job of dealing with it. So yes, there's absolutely a team, and they do a lot of that harder stuff. But nevertheless, as I said, I like to be in the trenches. I like to know what's going on. I still speak to staff every day of the week and get involved in, as you say, a lot of the things I like. So I like to get involved in the food and the wine and the projects and the decor, and so actually quite an interfering old busybody, really.
Yeah, I think if you can do all of the fun bits, and like you say, it's things aren't necessarily hard. I just think they take a longer time, don't they? It can be a lot of hours, but we're lucky to be in an industry which is good fun. And I think if you can get to the point where you can run the business from an iPad on a motorbike, that's got to be key. Robin, any more adventures planned?
Nothing planned just at the moment. I think travel in general, this because of what's happened in the last few months, has been put on hold. I think let's see what opens up and how it becomes in the next few months. But we like to travel. We like to see new things. So I'm sure there will be something somewhere in the future.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, look, thank you so much. You've been exceptionally generous with your time. You don't realise how much time you've given me because it's probably gone quite fast for you, but we've overrun a little bit, but I was enjoying it so much. Where should people go if they want to follow your adventures? I think you're pretty active on Twitter, but if people want to follow you or want to follow the business, is there a particular channel that's best for people to go to, Robin?
From the business point of view, please follow us on Instagram or Twitter. In fact, we're rebuilding our...
You were hacked, weren't you?
We were hacked, and we lost all of our Instagram followers.
Was it the Russians?
Who knows?
They get the blame for it anyway.
Yeah. Or the Chinese.
Yeah.
Please follow us on Instagram. I'm not an Instagrammer personally. I'm a tweeter. That's largely because I don't really know how to do the Instagram thing, which is pretty pathetic. But anyway, so yes, please follow us or sign up for our regular newsletters, which are full of juicy information.
Perfect, and inspiration. Great. I will put links to all of those channels you mentioned on the show notes for this episode as well and make it clear. But yeah, Robin, thank you so much for sparing the time. My 100th episode, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's great.
So there you have it. If you got here, nice one. That was a long chat, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Go and stay in a pig, or at least visit one for lunch. You will be pleased that you did. They really are something special. And if you did enjoy the chat, please pick up the device you're listening on now and scroll down to the review section. Hit 5 stars, and why not subscribe whilst you're there? And if you have a smidgen more time, leave a few words. It really helps those algorithms get this show in front of more people, and that helps me encourage more awesome guests to say yes when I get in touch for a chat. And if you head over to humansofhospitality.co.uk, you'll also find links to the social channels that Robin and I mentioned, and perhaps whilst you're there, sign up for the newsletter, where each week I will keep you posted on the latest guests, and I don't share your details with anyone at all. Okay, until next week, thanks for listening.